you can get in people's inboxes, and arguably they will read what you send sometimes, but it is what they're reading is 99% of it. It is the offer that you're putting in front of somebody is, I think, where almost, if people are screwing up, that's where they're screwing up.
You got to do better than just saying like, here's a free trial, right? That's too much commitment. You might be selling more against bandwidth than you are against budget.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of feedback that people learn.
Honest Ecommerce is a weekly podcast where we interview direct-to-consumer brand founders and leaders to find out what it takes to start, grow, and scale an online business today. Hey everybody, welcome back to another episode of Honest Ecommerce. Today, I'm welcoming to the show a gentleman I've worked with for years and years now in the Shopify ecosystem. I'm excited to bring him on the show and talk about what he's been up to recently. Sean Wendt from dtcmvp. Sean, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's only when I get introduced that I realize how ridiculous of a name dtcmvp is and how many syllables it is.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mouthful, and it's also what I think about this podcast too. Honest Ecommerce, the way it rolls together is everybody forgets about the E, and they also confuse it with the Honest Company, and I'm sure you're familiar with them.
Oh, yeah. Fair.
All right, so before we talk about what you're up to now, I think it makes sense to talk a bit about your history in this ecosystem. And kind of what you had been doing, because that just ties right into, you know what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. I mean, everything that I started building, I guess, with dtcmvp is certainly something that I feel like was born out of a need. But I started in ecom at Postscript, and I was the first employee at Postscript, and that was back in 2019.
Is that when we first met in Denver at a meetup?
I think so.
Oh man, time flies.
Yeah, so we're at this point that feels like OGs. I mean, there's still like, Recharge and Bolt Commerce and like Klaviyo and stuff like that, but we're definitely in like that next cohort.
Absolutely. So you were the first hire at Postscript. What were you supposed to be doing?
Starting at Postscript, we did not hire like a huge team out of the beginning. So I would say like Postscript felt like working at two different companies from like a go-to-market strategy standpoint. The first 2 years, I probably oversaw or like helped hire maybe the first couple people in a lot of the different client-facing like departments. So BDRs, support, customer success managers, account executives, stuff like that. Right around when we raised the B, we hired like a CMO, a VP of sales, and a VP of CS within like a 2-month period or like a 6-week period. And then that's when I sort of dropped into this, more like a go-to-market strategy. I was doing like the head of operations role, and we did a lot with like Salesforce and getting territories and comp plans and analytics and stuff like that together. I ran training, stuff like that. But, at Postscript in particular, that was like a pretty different chapter of growing your SaaS in like e-commerce. Things were at like peak frothy, and everybody knew the Postscript name. So we had like a big team of BDRs sending emails, going to events. I feel like cold email is still like an integral part of getting your name out there and getting meetings. Famously, Attentive is out there giving AirPods for demos and stuff like that. And all of that kind of led to most folks' pipeline, or like how they were like getting most of their pipeline. From Postscript, I leave after 4 years, and I wind up after a couple stops. I go to this company called Tydo. We're doing like reporting and analytics for brands. And now it's me and like 2 BDRs, and this is post-COVID. Cold email like really didn't work very well for us at all. So cold email went from something that we had like a 20-person team, sending emails. Now there's like AI involved, and you're spending more time like warming up your domains than you are like sending, thoughtful messages or anything like that. And so for us and our like small team at Tydo, we just wanted to get in front of brands. We had a really hard time just simply having conversations to find out if what we were building was interesting or novel, or let alone like have like a proper sales conversation about it. So that was sort of like the genesis of a lot of the D2C MVP stuff, is like when we would talk to friendly brands and ask them, for years, like we would send emails and we would have meetings, and then that was like a good way to get a foot in the door. What changed? And I think the combination of putting junior salespeople on calls, doing 30 slides in 30 minutes, like we just got further and further away from like senior conversations with, if you're like a VP of ecom and every time you get on the phone, it's not a VP on the other side, right? It's usually somebody like a lot more junior, just trying to like run through a script and sell you. So we had just gotten a lot of feedback that, people would be down to explore new vendors and like explore new stuff that's being built, but we had to go like way more thoughtful with it.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into what you've been doing over there at dtcmvp, but I kind of want to have you break down a few concepts for the audience. I would say, obviously, first and foremost, a lot of the audience is direct consumer brands. So what we're talking about here, this go-to-market strategy for like, let's just call it a SaaS for lack of a better term, is a little over their head. What they're doing is, Facebook ads, and they're getting their product in front of customers, right? But the product for a SaaS is the app, right? So when you mention like a BDR and these outreach strategies, I guess like 5 years ago, what was that 101 level like go-to-market strategy? Like the number one thing you guys were trying and working at Postscript? You kind of already mentioned it, but I want you to really call it out and then talk about how that isn't really, I guess, delivering these days.
Yeah, fair. No, a good call out for anyone that's working brand side. You're probably used to getting either a lot of emails from SaaS partners asking you to get on the phone and explore what they do, or you're getting invited to events, and those events every year are getting more and more elaborate, right? Like now Shop Talk's doing like F1 racing sessions and helicopter trips to the Grand Canyon for lunch and stuff like that. Like every year we've kind of topped ourselves dating back to 2015 in terms of what the vendors are willing to do to get 20 minutes, 30 minutes with somebody on a Zoom call to kind of explain what they do, in hopes that it can turn into a deeper conversation or a sale or something like that. And so to break down some of those terms, like the concept of like a business development representative or a sales development representative, these are common terms on the software side, sometimes on the agency side, for somebody who sits at in a sales kind of environment or like sits at home, and they're usually sending a ton of emails, LinkedIn DMs, different things to get somebody's attention and say, like, I'd love to set up time with you and someone on my team. Early stage, you've got a lot of new up and coming apps or vendors. It's the founder sending those messages, but companies like Postscript, and as a lot of vendors get bigger, they're hiring dedicated people to send that, like, for lack of a better term, mass outreach.
Yeah.
To try to get as many brands to get on the phone and explore what they do.
I guess what I want to like educate people on, because these are things I've learned in the last 10 years of doing this too, is like that goal of that SDR and or BDR, however you want to phrase it, and they have all sorts of names all over the place. But the ultimate goal is, there's two. It's like, one is just to get like that for initial, like, yes, I'm interested in something, but the end goal is getting them on the phone, getting the prospect that they're reaching out to on the phone with basically a more qualified salesperson or a more senior person on their team to talk about their product or service.
Yeah. And different people treat it differently. Sometimes they'll put that junior person on the first call to quote unquote vet, or what we would say is qualify. And those can be like even less enjoyable conversations sometimes, because it's like, you reached out to me and you wanted to talk to me about what you're building. And now I'm sitting here answering like how big my business is or what my budget might be for something that I don't even really understand what the product is.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm all of a sudden jumping through some hoops in order to earn like a second call. So different vendors treat that differently. I think some are certainly better at hopefully recognizing, oh, wow, we have a CMO at XYZ brand, getting on the phone. Let's put our best foot forward. But I do think like early COVID, like during what we would just call like the frothiest time of selling SaaS, like we developed a lot of bad habits for how we treat brands in those kind of initial prospecting discovery conversations.
Yeah. And then the thing is that it's only gotten easier in the past 5 years to send a message on whatever platform you want. But just because you can doesn't mean you should. And that gets into my kind of the next thing I really wanted you to touch on here is, and obviously what is kind of core to what DTC MVP does is you can get in people's inboxes and you arguably they will read what you send sometimes, but it is what they're reading is 99% of it. It is the offer that you're putting in front of somebody is I think where almost if people are screwing up, that's where they're screwing up.
Yeah, I would agree because there's also a lot of conversation around personalizing emails, but what we're going down this road is like personalizing based on some college somebody went to or some like thing you could look up online. But at the end of the day, like what you're trying to talk to them about is not really relevant to their like super busy life and their super busy calendar. So what we found is that instead of asking people if they're interested in buying what you have, at the end of the day, you're better off asking simply for feedback. And because post-COVID, we've got a lot more people working remote. We've got a lot more people doing fractional work or consulting work or things on the side. Nobody really wants either another pair of AirPods or tickets to like another concert, or box seat somewhere. There are a lot of things that have sort of led to this moment of like, we ought to treat this a little bit more like consulting on the first call. Let's just find out if you can give me feedback on what I'm building. That's what founders do anyway when they're first usually launching a product, right? They have a vision. They have some sort of a hack that they think they're going to build like their product around. And so to reach out to brands with more of why don't I show you what I'm doing? I will pay you for your time. Things like MentorPass and intro.co, like these are appstoreresearch.com. Like there are websites that have come before dtcmvp that would sort of make it more of like a consulting conversation at the beginning. And then it's only from there that you can find out if there's any kind of a match. And it's a little bit more brand driven at that point to say, okay, cool, this is actually a fit and let's keep talking. Or like, no, this isn't a fit and here's why. And that's like a really important data point for anybody building.
Hey, everybody, just a quick reminder. Please like this video and subscribe if you haven't. We're releasing interviews like this every week, so don't miss out. Now back to the interview. And I think we maybe danced around it. So what is the service offering that D2C MVP is offering? Who is your customer? And then what is like the service that you're providing that customer?
For sure. So at the end of the day, it's a marketplace, I suppose, that sits in front of both folks on the brand side. These are the people that we want to come to an event or to download our ebook or to respond to a cold email, to ultimately explore what we're building on the software side. And then the clients are also just folks that are on the software side that want to meet more brands. They want to either get a foot in the door, they want to get that feedback, or they want to find customers through like a channel this way, but they'll do it kind of the more thoughtful way versus like the spammy cold email way. So everything that we do is about vetting partners that we think the brands would be interested in, and then talking with the partners about what's the angle we're going to take, what is the feedback that we're getting, what are we doing that's different than the other vendors out there. And then we go to the brands and we source these meetings and we say, hey, I have a client that's willing to pay you for your feedback. And if this sounds interesting to you, here's details and you can click a link and book time with them. And so for a lot of these companies that would otherwise be like out there warming up, domains and doing the whole cold email game, this is a way for them to have like a high velocity or a high volume of meetings with 8-9-figure brands, get to that answer much quicker, start a dialogue on, is this a fit? Why isn't it a fit? What could we do for it to be a fit? Anything that would like just result in that at bat. And then on the brand side, we just get a ton of feedback that like, great, I'm never going to respond to a cold email ever again because you're going to bring, these opportunities to me. You've already done the work of making sure that they're legit. I'm getting compensated for my time the same way as I would on MentorPass or any other kind of consulting call. So we've certainly tailored it to be as easy and like safe and smooth as possible for the brands.
Is there any like insight or stuff that a tech partner has learned from these calls that comes to mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's stuff on both ends of the call that you could say, or like both ends of the process. On one hand, we've had a lot of partners tell us like, man, you've gotten us meetings with somebody who like I can see in my CRM, I have cold emailed them, 50 times over the last 6 to 12 months. So on one hand, just the insight of like this feedback approach is such a better way to start a conversation in a relationship than it is to be like sending mass emails that are never getting responded to. I think that there's a lot of learning in terms of like how you show up in the market, a market that we all know is like actually pretty small in terms of how many great brands there are that apps want to partner with. And then more like specifically on the feedback side, I think that we learn a lot about like the sales process and a lot more about like, it might not be that you're learning these giant eureka light bulb moments when you're talking about just the product. Like, your product's good. That's why you built it. That's why you have happy customers. But people do learn on a pretty regular basis, like how brands make decisions about vetting new tools, what it takes to bring a new tool into the team to even like evaluate it. How many different times a year is this brand in particular looking at their vendors and their contracts and consolidating or adding something new? How do they think about ROI? How does their finance team think about trying something new? I think that there's actually a lot of steps that we skip on the vendor side, just thinking that we built a cool new app or software or whatever. But what you learn on these calls is like how to become like a part of like a brand new business's, like how to be like a new part of their stack. You know what I mean? From more like a business process standpoint.
Yeah, this is getting a little bit more high level consulting, but I think there is a little bit of like a founder's ignorance to a lot of people build a product they think people want without actually making sure people want it. And this type of feedback loop will make sure you're on the right track or give you some direct feedback that shows you might be going down the wrong path with either the entire product or a feature of the product that you're working with.
Yeah, or you might just learn that the way that you're going about it.
Yeah.
Because outside of my program, you're doing the dinners and you're doing the ebooks and you're posting into the void, on LinkedIn and the rest of it. You get quite a lot of feedback that maybe you're making this thing too hard to sign up for, right? You find out after doing 20 calls, 30 calls, like simply saying like our stuff works and we have a free trial, like isn't quite enough to like actually make somebody download a thing. You're talking only to busy people, that have like a full plate, and you got to do better than just saying like, here's a free trial, right? That's too much commitment. You might be selling more against bandwidth than you are against budget.
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of feedback that people learn. And another like pretty common one is a lot of times founders are doing the hosting of these calls. And it's like a bummer, but it's very like eye-opening when we've even have brands say like, wow, when I met the founder of that company, that was a fantastic call. Like I really see, his or her vision kind of thing. But we've heard multiple times, like, 6 months ago, I talked to someone in this other role on their team, did not come away with nearly that same experience, because you realize like how much more sort of insight and consulting kind of strategy comes from the founder level of these companies. And when you're putting maybe more junior salespeople on the call, it's not your best foot in the door. And that like reflects in the results of, these feedback calls too. So people just learn more about like how to start these conversations.
Absolutely. And again, just getting that direct feedback from your ideal customer, right? And one other thing that I know is, and this may be more developer-minded founders, is they are super into the tech and the features of their product when brands are, will this solve my problem? They're outcome-oriented and that's what they care about. So I know that you and I have talked about this where folks learn that they're talking about things that don't matter to their customer, and their customer will tell them what actually matters. It's like, if you talk about this, or this thing is like the selling point of the product, you'll get more sales.
Totally. I mean, I feel like I could do a whole TED talk on kind of like what performs well when somebody's like a complete stranger and you're trying to get your point across on what you've built. You want to like go into show and tell mode. And it can be very tempting, especially when you've paid for somebody's time to do that 30 slides in 30 minutes, right? Like maybe if I just say the right thing, 11 minutes into the call, their ears will perk up and like they'll get like excited about what I'm building. But ultimately, what works really well is finding the stuff that they're already working on. Like when I was selling Tyto, for example, if I asked 10 brands, how many were like interested in better reporting and analytics, it'd be like 1 out of 10. Like for the most part, nobody ever felt like they were like in market, or like what I was selling was more of like a nice to have. But if I asked the same 10 brands, how many of you are tasked with in 2026 to like increase retention, or you want to get better at segmentation, you find these things that are already probably the projects people are talking about internally anyway, whether it's you or some other app, they've got other ways of going about the same thing. The stuff that works really well in feedback calls is trying to get to the bottom of like what folks are already spending all their bandwidth caring about. And then you have to find a way to pretty much say, there are lots of ways, to reduce CAC, to increase conversion rate, to do these different things that are kind of universal OKRs for a lot of brands internally. How is what you built the cheaper, faster, better way to do these things, and how are you going to make it easy for them to test it or try it?
I hope that a conversation like this is educational for our listeners, because I know there are more than just brand owners out there. I know there are a lot of people working these SaaSes and stuff like that. So if I'm listening to this and I'm working at a startup, what makes it a good idea for us to reach out to DTC MVP, or like what would actually maybe what is not a good fit? Maybe are we too small? Like what are some of those indicators of fit?
Yeah, there's probably like a couple spectrums that you would kind of see, like where do we fall on this for it to be a fit or not. At the end of the day, I think anybody that's like playing the cold email game or they're spending a lot of money traveling to events, Shop Talk, for example, does hosted meetings, right? I just came back from e-tail last month. They will also do hosted meetings. I'm really just doing that over Zoom at the end of the day. So there are things that you can look at, like if we're doing this, is this also a good way to meet new brands? But then you should just ask yourself, like, what would make that, even those other avenues, like a good channel for us? Because if you're brand new and you're still like just working with a few design partners and you have no idea if like what you're building is ready for prime time, it's not like gas on the fire mode, then you probably don't want to kick off, what is a more thorough, like I'm doing tens of meetings a month kind of thing. And that would be a pretty expensive way to just validate if it's like even a good idea or not. Usually folks that I'm working with are somewhere in that sweet spot. Maybe they've got 10 to 20 team members. Maybe they're a bit bigger, but at the end of the day, like they're looking for new ways to meet brands that don't involve like spamming the cold email button and things like that. But at the end of the day, like I'm not really working with like Klaviyo or Yotpo, for example. Like the brands aren't like, oh yeah, Klaviyo wants to get feedback. Like if we're just naming like bigger companies that probably don't need to use feedback as like a way to open the door, we're usually like most of my clients are probably in that sweet spot of like you have customers, but you're not working with like thousands of brands most likely.
Yeah, you're definitely, you're not going into a series yet of like fundraising. It would be a guess.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say a lot of partners maybe have done like seed or A, kind of fundraising, but they're still in like gas on the fire mode. They're coming out with new products all the time. They're very much in like the, we want to meet as many people as we can and find out, the edge cases and who this works for and who it doesn't.
Absolutely. On like the flip side of it though, I think there are maybe more of these folks. I'm a director of e-com at a successful company. e-commerce manager. Heck, I'm a CMO. I'd like money. I'd consult on these calls. I'd talk to these brands. Do I also reach out to you?
Yeah, ultimately, like Sean at dtcmvp.com is the email that catches applications or just sort of reach outs from both sides. A lot of times everything is going to be match based, so when somebody reaches out, we might ask a couple questions. We want to find out, A, is there anything that's like actually of interest to you so that we can like do a better job matching you with somebody? But B, what is kind of like the profile of your role, the types of functions you oversee, the types of projects that you're typically going to like have the most to weigh in on? Especially because something like e-com, for example, is just like, it can be a pretty catch-all term, and mean different things at different brands. So anyway, once we kind of figure out what types of vendors you're a good fit to meet and either give feedback to or network with, that's when we try to get into a rhythm where we'll send you an email that kind of lets you know like who you've matched with, and you can take a next step from there. But as you can imagine, like because everybody's busy, it's all like extremely flexible and sort of meant to be working around people's calendars, because if this was born out of like cold email not working very well anymore, we just know that we had to make it, super duper flexible.
Absolutely. Now, Sean, is there anything I didn't ask you about that you think would resonate with our audience today?
No, the only thing that I didn't comment as much on is probably the folks that I do see maybe not perform as well with these sorts of like channels, because I'm not the only one doing the types of things that I'm doing. I think that at the end of the day, the feedback approach works really well. If you like genuinely have a new thing, like a very like novel approach to something, you want to get feedback on why that might be different than something that people have worked with in the past. But at the same time, if your only goal is to get somebody to like rip and replace like a huge piece of software in their business, then usually like a feedback approach is not going to be the most conducive way to getting very far with somebody, because a feedback call can be really good for like explaining why your thing is ROI positive, why your app is really easy to test, why it's a new approach to doing something they haven't done before. When you start getting into some of the other vendor categories, I think about like ERPs, for example. I think about things where if your value prop is that you're just like easier than NetSuite, there's nothing wrong with that. It's probably true. But in the span of a 20-minute call, that can be like difficult to get over that hump unless you just have the right mentality going in that like, I'm simply planting seeds and like, these are not easy conversations to have and finding people with the right timing.
Absolutely. Now, one more time, what is the website and what is the email to get a hold of you?
For sure. The website is dtcmvp.com. So full circle back to the beginning of the call. I was very excited to get the .com, but it is simply dtcmvp.com. Sean, so my first name at dtcmvp.com is the best way to reach out. I'm also super active on LinkedIn. So if you like any DMs or hitting me up there, I'm around.
Awesome. Sean, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today and sharing all that amazing information.
Definitely. Great to chat.